Youth sports can be really hard, especially if you're wanting to raise your kid in ways that produce healthy adults when they're done playing. Each week on Healthy Sports Parents, we have conversations designed to help you keep your athlete mentally and emotionally healthy. Whether you're just starting out in rec ball or you're traveling every weekend to elite tournaments, we're here to help you strengthen your relationship with your kids through sports. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Carone, and I'm the host of the show. Today, we're joined by Brealon Ashworth. Brealon was a soccer player growing up who fell in love with weightlifting in college while getting an exercise science degree. He's now a USA Weightlifting certified coach and owns 2 gyms focusing on helping athletes become more powerful and explosive. His athletes have gone on to play at numerous Division I and Division II schools, and they even have a couple baseball players currently in the minors as well. Best of all, he does it with a focus on proper mechanics so athletes will stay as healthy as possible. Completely candidly, I have known Brealon since we were kids. I go to one of his gyms. He is one of my strength coaches that has helped me learn to fall in love with lifting weights and being active in the gym in a way that I never was growing up. So I'm excited to share what he knows with you, what I've learned through him with you. So with that being said, let's welcome in Coach Brealon Ashworth. Hey, Brealon, welcome to the show.
What's going on?
So I'm going to tell people before we get into this, just because I think it's funny. If you're watching on YouTube, Brealon's all framed up nice and pretty right now, but a minute ago, his video was a little too high. So he is using the step boxes that you have in a gym that you jump onto as a desk right now because he didn't have a great desk in the gym. And he just took off the little 6-inch one to make his desk a little lower. And I think that's the most performance coach thing I've ever seen in my life.
Absolutely. You got to use what you got, right?
Hey, before we get into coach, we want to meet dad. We do this every week. Can you tell us a little bit about your kids, what they play, and what it's like being dad to them?
Absolutely. I got a 2 and a 4-year-old son. A 4 and a 6-year-old son. They both play t-ball currently. We have looked at playing soccer, which is what my background is in. But right now we're sticking to t-ball, and being a t-ball dad is awesome. I love it. Life's crazy with 2 boys, always fighting. But it's a good time. We're obsessed with Pokemon at the moment, so I get to relive my childhood a little bit, play with the Pokemon cards, trade with my son. So
you were talking Pokemon in the gym the other day, so like it truly is the center of your life right now.
Yep.
Hey, so we've talked a lot about this stuff off interview before because if I didn't mention this in the intro, I go to Brealon's gym. Brealon is my fitness coach. And so I have learned a lot from him over the last, 5 years now. So I know the answer to some of these questions, but your perspective on them is so different and is communicated different than I've heard in the past. That's why I wanted to have you on. The first thing I want to ask you about, for most of us listening, we were likely taught that kids shouldn't start lifting weights until they're 14 or so. That was the advice we were given as kids. It wasn't until like 8th grade, maybe 9th grade that kids should start lifting weights. Has that changed? You've mentioned to before that it has, and I know we've got some younger kids in the gym. What age should kids start weight training?
Growing up, that's what we heard, right? You had to be a teenager to lift weights, 14, 15, 16 years old. I don't know if you remember going to the YMCA, since that was the only gym we had in town.
The only gym we had growing up.
We were growing up, you had to be 16 to enter the weight room. Anyone younger couldn't go in without adult supervision. And then I still think you had to be 12 to even go in there with your parents. It's definitely
an interesting. Use like the ellipticals and the treadmills even.
Absolutely. So you weren't allowed in there at all unless you were 12 and supervised or 16 years old. It's definitely an interesting topic, and it's changed a lot over the last 20 years. People always thought you had to be a teenager, you had to be hitting puberty before you could start introducing any kind of resistance training. When I was coming through Appalachian State, the climate was changing. They said kids can definitely lift weights, but the more recent studies show that even kids as young as 6 can effectively lift weights and do resistance training. And the most recent study actually said that 6-year-olds can even do a 1-rep max safely as long as they are in a supervised professional environment.
You guys posted a video on Instagram the other day of a 10-year-old doing a sled push. Yes. He had a 45-pound weight on the sled, and he was booking it down the turf and back. So when we think about younger kids doing resistance training, like what type of stuff are we talking? Because are we talking deadlifts and squats, or are we talking other type of things at that age?
Absolutely. So we keep it basic when it comes to strength training the youth. We don't do any complex, complicated movements. We go back to the basics. So the programs will be squat, they'll have bench press or some variation of an overhead press to strengthen their shoulders. They'll have deadlifts to develop muscle and get stronger. So the program is kind of basic, but it's necessary for kids of that age. We definitely still do things like sled pushes and explosive movements, med balls. We use jumping, all kinds of power production stuff. But the focus at the younger ages is building strength, learning the consistency of coming to the gym. And once we get a base, then we can start expanding on the athletic side of things.
So it's a lot like youth sports in that we're not caring about the wins are nice, but it's not about the big giant wins. It's not about how much can you max at 10, 11 years old. It's more about learning the movements. Because one of the things I like about you all that I tell people about you all the time, I was never taught how to lift weights growing up. So I was always scared to do some of the movements because I was scared of hurting myself. But what you spent so much time on, and you still spend time on in the gym and the other coaches, is making sure I do the movement right. Can you talk about the importance of that, especially at those younger ages, and why it's more important to get the movement right than it is to add heavier weights?
The interesting thing about that is that sports are significantly more dangerous than an organized strength training program. So the chances of injury are exponential. In the weight room, it's about 0.1% per 1,000 hours of athletes get injured. And most of those injuries are not significant. It's a strained muscle or something that's going to set them out for maybe a week or two, and then they're back in action. When you're talking sports, you run the risk of major injuries, broken bones, ACL tears, MCL tears, shoulder injuries, things that will set them back greatly. So with that, our biggest focus is learning the proper movements, building good motor patterns so that when they're in sport, they have
Explain what a motor pattern is, so for people who don't have that background.
So just the ability to move through range of motion and control your body, basically. With a squat, a good motor pattern would be being able to control the descent, sitting all the way down on the bottom and then standing back up without any kind of weird movements going on, any hip shift, knees caving, things like that. And that transfers over to sport because you develop those motor patterns, the joints get stronger, they get more stable, and then when they're in sport, their joints are more stable, which lowers the risk of any kind of catastrophic injury, I suppose.
I saw something you posted at one point of a youth athlete. I want to say a middle school athlete that in the video, and it talked about how a full range of motion is better at a full range of motion at lower weights at that age is better than less range of motion at higher weights. Intuitively, I think that makes sense. But for people who didn't grow up lifting weights and don't know a ton of that stuff, why is the movement more important than the weight at that age?
At any age, really. So full range of motion is going to be the most important thing, and that's the biggest thing that we focus on here. It's the best for developing muscle because you're taking the muscle through full range of motion, which gets a bigger stretch, which leads to more muscle growth. It also helps maintain mobility, which is not necessarily a big issue in youth athletes because they don't have tight muscles, they don't have life experiences that have changed their mobility.
All the stuff we deal with as adults.
Right. But for us, it's great because it can maintain or even increase mobility in big joints like your hips, knees, ankles, and that's important for day-to-day life. So if you're struggling to walk around and your hips hurt, then some deep full range of motion squats, even if it's just body weight, will be super beneficial in increasing your mobility and helping with that. And as far as athletes go, it increases muscle mass, which it leads to increased power production, and they have better range of motion in their joints and safer range of motion in their joints. They're not going, if you work on a full depth squat, then you're never going to go below that. If you're cutting reps short, if you're stopping at 90 degrees, well, anytime they're in sport and they get below that 90 degrees, then you're at a higher risk of an injury.
Because the muscles haven't trained going past that 90 degrees.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned injury prevention, and this is one of the things that I don't know if it's me being naive, if it's me being inexperienced, but I saw a couple years ago we had some volleyball players in the gym, and their workouts were so shoulder focused and overhead focused, and I didn't understand why, so I asked you one day, and you said that their workouts were at that moment very focused on injury prevention. And so because in volleyball they do the overhead motion so much, you all train the shoulder so much. So can you talk about the importance of training, not just to get big and strong and fast and all that, but training for injury prevention and how that can be specific to different sports?
I guess injury prevention is a little misleading because we can't prevent injuries. There's so many factors when you're in the weight room or you're in sport that can lead to small nagging injuries up to big injuries. What we're trying to do is lower the risk of injuries as much as humanly possible with exercise. So for your example for volleyball, a lot of young volleyball players don't lack range of motion. They don't lack mobility in these joints, and your shoulder's a big joint. What they lack is
tall, skinny girls can likely move pretty well.
Yes, but what they lack is stability in those joints. And so what happens is when they're going up to hit a ball, if they don't have stability at this end range of motion, you're putting some weird forces and tension on your shoulder. So our goal with a volleyball player and baseball, quarterbacks, any kind of overhead athlete where the focus is throwing overhead, hitting overhead, is going to be to create a ton of stability and strength in that joint so that they can stay as healthy as possible. How
does that translate to a sport like basketball?
Basketball is a little bit harder because there's not a specific movement. It's kind of we look at every joint. Basketball has a high prevalence of knee injuries, so we spend a lot of time working on knee stability, strength, and explosiveness. So obviously there's a little bit of an overhead component, and we still train that. But as a volleyball player, we would put a huge emphasis on the shoulder and creating stability in the shoulder and the elbow and the wrist. While basketball, we kind of have to train them all over and focus on everything.
So for someone who is, let's say they're a multi-sport athlete in high school, they do multiple things, and let's just go. I'm going to give you a random example. I'm thinking of some of the guys that we have: soccer and baseball. What type of training, where are the overlaps and where are the sport specific things with those body motions? Just to give an example for what parents have to think about here.
So the way we handle situations like that is we focus on one sport at a time. Obviously there's some carryover and the programs will have a little bit of both in there, but the focus goes to one sport. So if they're 6 months out from baseball season and soccer season just ended, then the program for the next 6 months is going to be geared towards preparing them for baseball. And then as soon as baseball ends, we'll jump straight into a soccer development program where we're looking at increasing their change of direction and keeping the knees healthy. We're not as focused on the upper body because there's very little upper body usage in soccer. That's not to say that we don't train it, but it's not the focus of the program.
You're still doing those upper body things, but you're adding some more stuff on the turf that you might not be doing with some of the baseball players.
Absolutely. And the program is going to be, the base of the program is going to be very similar for all athletes. There are some exceptions where, like with football players, we bench press because they have bench press in their combine. That's part of their everyday workout once they get to high school and college. With volleyball, baseball players, we do landmine press. It allows their scapula to move freely and naturally.
What's your scapula?
Pin it down. Your shoulder blade, sorry. So it allows their shoulder blade to move like it does when they're playing their sport. It's not pinned down against the bench, which leads to a little healthier shoulder, and it's more sport specific for those overhead athletes.
I didn't put this in our notes, but I've been thinking about it as we've been talking. Last year, I've said on here before that I'm the PA announcer for our local high school baseball team. Last year, the baseball team spent the winter working with you guys on base running. And the gym doesn't have 90 foot of turf that they can run on. So you all focused on explosiveness and that type of thing. Talk about the importance, because I know we have some youth coaches that are listening to this. Why is it important for teams to focus on that type of stuff together and not just everyone going out and doing individual training on their own?
Well, at the base level, they're all doing the same thing. The goal is the same. Everyone knows exactly what the goal is and what the team wants to accomplish. So if we can all get on the same page, then everyone is working towards the same thing. It makes a huge difference. The biggest thing we saw with those guys is we worked obviously on acceleration because we have about 30 yards inside, or not even 60 feet, a little bit less than that. So we can't do a full stolen base, but what we can work on is accelerating from that staggered stance and max effort for the first 20 yards so that we know that they can get to that base faster than the pitcher can, or the catcher can throw the ball there.
One of the things that I know is a soapbox for you, so I'm going to tee you up a little bit. You've had parents come in who are interested in getting their kids training, but they're worried about, especially their teenage girl, getting too bulky, or they're worried about their athlete getting too bulky. And you've got a little bit of a smile coming on your face right now because I know this is such an issue for you. So when I tell you that, I'm just going to shut up and let you talk for a minute. Can you tell us why the bulky idea is such a fallacy that people shouldn't worry about?
To start it off, I've been strength training for 15 years now, consistently and competitively, and I've been trying to get too bulky the whole time, and I'm still not there. So realistically, it's not going to happen. And our training is centered around athleticism. So our goal is not to turn them into professional powerlifters or bodybuilders or to put on this massive amount of size. Our goal is to put on muscle so that they can produce more power, so that they can be more athletic, so that they can play in college. So you have to step back from it and kind of look at it from that perspective and realize that while we're doing some of these exercises that people associate with bodybuilding or Olympic weightlifting or powerlifting, that's not the end goal. That's just a piece of the puzzle. It's just a tool in our bag to get them more athletic, to be better at their sport.
The word power is something you have said quite a bit. And we think of power when we think of hitting in baseball or softball, but we might not necessarily think of power in other sports. I know we've got some hockey families listening. We've got some volleyball families. We've got all these different sports that have different definitions of the word power. When you talk about power, what is the benefit of being a powerful athlete in a game?
When I'm talking about power, I'm talking about being able to put force into the ground and move. So that can be swinging a baseball bat really hard. It can be sprinting really fast. It can be stopping in hockey and changing directions very quickly. All of those things require power. And that is the major focus of what we do with our sports performance here at Ignite. It is the basis of athleticism. So when people think of athleticism, they think about jumping higher, running faster, changing directions quickly. When you think of the best athletes in the world, those are characteristics that they have. But to get there, you have to have power. And to get power, you have to have muscle. And so it boils down to, it's a process, just like youth sports, where we're starting with the basic and we're building up. So your 8-year-old athlete might do bodyweight squats. Your middle schooler might squat 100 pounds at the bar. And then once we get to high school, we might be capped out on where we want to be with squat, and the focus may shift into more single leg stuff and more developing power stuff. It's a continuum. It takes time to get there.
One thing that is an issue that every family playing sports, especially at more competitive levels, deal with is time. Everyone's like, the coach wants more time on the field. They're telling them to get specialized lessons at whatever their sport is. And now we're talking about adding in strength training and performance training. You're obviously biased. You're a strength coach, you're a performance coach. So we'll acknowledge that. But where in your mind does the performance training need to fit in the whole? Like, we only have 7 days and kids got to go to school. They got to do projects. They got to do all this stuff. Where does it all fit in? How much should kids be doing? What should the priority be? How would you counsel a parent who's trying to do the best they can, but they're looking at the calendar and there's just no freaking time to do it all?
Yeah, it's challenging to say the least. And with sports these days, they're wanting more time on the field. They're doing all these extra things. They're doing showcases and all this stuff. But when it comes down to it, the basis of all of performance comes from a well-rounded strength routine. And it's going to sound like a sales pitch coming from me, but I'm very passionate about the fact that kids need a really good base to be really good athletes. And it's something that they're going to do when they get to college and the professional level year round. So they're going to train in season, they're going to train out of season. It's going to happen. So the best time to start is yesterday, depending on the age, once a week, twice a week, whatever you can fit in your schedule. But getting your kid into some kind of organized professional resistance training routine is super important. And I would put it, it's definitely not more important than the sport, obviously, but I would put it before specialized training, before showcase tournaments, before all this stuff that people fill their schedule with. Because if you don't have the ability to produce power to hit harder, then seeing a specialist is going to help you a little bit, but you're going to cap on your maximum potential because you don't have the base.
What if someone doesn't live in an area that has what you all do? Or, and the other piece of this I'll say is, what you do isn't cheap. And it is something that many families can't afford specialized one-on-one coaching with their athlete. So in those cases, whether it's a lack of finances or a lack of access, how would you encourage a parent to start their kid on a resistance training or strength training, performance training journey?
It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Obviously, the more you have access to, the better. But it's something that you can do at home with your kids. It could be a circuit that you find on the internet. You could reach out to a gym similar to us and get some online training where we provide you with the information to set the training up. We can give feedback on videos and things like that to make sure the kids are doing it properly. Most high schools and middle schools have strength training programs. Generally, they're not the best programs, but if that's all you have access to, then it's somewhere to start.
How should a parent vet a strength coach? Because this is a conversation, like, you have come up to me before and said, hey, watch this video. And having been around you, I know that something's off, but I wouldn't have been able to understand the intricacies of that having not known you. So how do you vet to find out who does it right?
Ask questions. Ask them what their experience is, what their degree is in, what kind of training they do. Ask a ton of questions. And that's my favorite thing when a client walks in the door and the first thing they say is, what's your background? What's your experience? Because then I can sit down and explain all the process of getting to where I'm at, whether it was interning in college weight rooms or working one-on-one with clients or coaching an Olympic weightlifting team. It all comes together. So my advice would be to ask a ton of questions and use your judgment, because you can tell if people are lying to you or they don't have the experience. And then if you just dive in a little bit deeper, you can definitely find that out.
I'm going to put you on the spot here because I think I just love the way your brain works and stuff like this. What is the single biggest thing parents should know about the performance side of youth sports that they probably aren't thinking about right now?
I mean, the biggest thing it comes down to is this is something that is definitely going to help them in the long run. So regardless of where you start, this is going to be much better than doing any kind of hitting camp or throwing camp, because it's going to build a base that's going to raise the roof for them. So Their cap out is going to be much higher if they're much stronger, much more athletic. It's going to be visible when they have muscles on the field. Bailey, for an example, is a good one. People notice her because she is jacked, and she's not overly jacked, but when she steps on the field with other high school softball players, you're drawn to her because you can tell that she works hard, she's athletic, she does what she needs to do in the gym.
And that's helped her earn a Division I scholarship for next year.
Absolutely.
The awkward part of the youth sports years, puberty, middle school. I know for me, I grew faster than my body could keep up with. It sounds weird, but like I grew so tall that my muscles couldn't keep up, that my tendons couldn't keep up, and I sprained my knees a lot. I sprained my ankles a lot. For the parents who have the middle school kids, who have the kids that are going through that awkward development right now where it's so hard to just use their bodies in a normal way because they're different than they were 6 months ago. Like, what does that look like? And what's the importance of training through that, even though their bodies aren't going to be the same in 6 months than they are right now anyways?
Well, it's important to train through it because you may be taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, but you're not taking 5 steps back. So it helps them build and get through the awkward years and maintain a little bit of strength while their muscles are growing. It's definitely a challenge. The training changes a little bit there because then the focus becomes a little more maintenance. We have to focus on muscle maintenance because they end up having tendon issues where the muscles are lengthening and it's pulling on the tendons. So we have to focus a little bit more on myofascial release, foam rolling, things like that to help them get through the training sessions. But once they stop growing, that's when you see a big surge in athletic performance because they've been putting in the work. Whereas if they didn't and they started from ground zero, it takes a little bit longer.
Is there ever a time where a kid's just falling behind too much that they can't make up for?
I don't think it's possible to not make up for. It definitely takes longer, and you're always going to be behind the curve, but I don't think it's impossible to get back there. It takes a lot of discipline and a lot of dedication to work through those times. If you have a kid who started at 8 and you got a kid who's starting at 15, the kid who started when he was 8 is obviously going to be well above the 15-year-old. But that's not to say that the 15-year-old can't close the gap relatively quickly, but he might not ever reach the level of the kid who started at 8.
You talked about training in season. You talked about how it might change out of season. What is the importance of training while you're in season? Because you're using those muscles at practice, you're using them during games. Like, is it not too much to also strength train on top of all that?
No. So we changed the program in season. It becomes a 100% maintenance program. So there's no heavy weights being lifted. It's all moderate weights. The volume is lower. If we're doing med ball drills, then we're switching sides and working on the non-dominant side so that we can stop muscle imbalances from happening. So it's a different ball game, but this would be my soapbox. So this is the one thing that people are missing when it comes to strength training. The ones who do stop when the season starts and then regress for the 3 months that they're in season, and then we're starting below where we ended. So the in season is just there to help us maintain where we're at through season. It also helps prevent injury or lower the risk of injuries. It doesn't prevent them, but lowers the risk. And then we're picking back up where we left off to grow more. So it's not the 2 steps forward, 1 step back scenario.
And then from a recovery perspective, what does performance training, what role does it have in the recovery from games? Because let's say your 16-year-old sophomore in high school goes and plays a tournament all weekend, volleyball player, basketball player, whatever. I mean, you're doing 3 to 5 games over the course of 2 to 3 days. It's going to wreck your body. And even at 16 years old, it still plays a part and it still like impacts you. The natural thing to think is, I'm going to go home and I'm going to sit on the couch for 2 or 3 days, let my body recover. Why should athletes be putting time in the gym on that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday afterwards to recover instead of just letting their body recover on their own?
Well, then it becomes active recovery, and you're moving the muscles, you're getting things loosened up. You're not sitting on the couch and letting everything get super tight, and then you have to address that 3 days later. By doing the active recovery, and obviously the program looks a little different. If they just completed a tournament and they come in on Monday, we're not going to throw them under a heavy set of 5 on squats. It's going to be dialed back a lot. We're just going to kind of move, get things loosened up. It helps keep them in the rhythm, and that's probably the biggest thing, where consistency is the biggest key in strength training. If you can't be consistent, then your results won't be consistent. So if we can get them in there, even just to move around, foam roll, stretch, maybe move a little bit, then they're still on their normal schedule. It helps with the consistency, and it kind of keeps them in the rhythm of coming to the gym.
For players who are wanting to go to college, obviously strength training is a part of a college program. You've got a couple college athletes that work out at your gym. You've got a couple who played in college and are now in the minors. What's the biggest thing that most kids aren't ready for when they go from high school to a collegiate weight training program?
Most of your kids in high school, and AJ can be a testament to this, especially the guys, when they're lifting to get big. They want to put on muscle. They want to look good for the girls around them. They want to feel good, and they're not doing the performance side of things, the jumping, the running, the med balls, the sprinting, any of that. And so when they come back, the first thing they say is, "You guys do it the right way here. I wish I had paid more attention here because we do all this stuff when we get to college, and I wasn't prepared for it." And I don't think – go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think athletes are prepared for the amount of work that college athletics entails, whether that's the weight room, the schoolwork, the sport itself.
AJ is a kid who went to one of our local high schools, went and played at East Carolina and Charlotte for baseball, and is now in the Phillies organization. And he's a kid that battled through some injuries, had to completely reshape his body once he got to college because, like you said, he was just so focused on getting big. And now I watch him. He came in this summer in between when college ended, when he graduated, and before he went off after he got drafted to the Phillies camp. He was spending a solid 45 minutes at the beginning of his workout just stretching and trying to get his body loose. What is the role in stretching, and what have we gotten wrong about stretching in sports?
So stretching is a very interesting topic. There's 2 camps really, either stretch or don't stretch. And I tend to lead more towards the dynamic warm-up camp where our movements are explosive, we're getting the blood flowing, we're not just static stretching, because static stretching has been shown to not provide any benefits, and if anything, it hinders performance slightly because you're pre-stretching the muscles, which tears the fibers a little bit, which just means a lower power production. And it's minuscule, but it's not ideal for performance. What's interesting about AJ is he's actually shifted his focus on that now. So now he does like a 10-minute warm up and then he jumps straight into it. And he told me when he was in over Christmas break that he was spending too much time warming up and he wasn't having enough energy or putting enough focus on the training side. So he's dialed his back a little bit. So my kind of thought on warm ups is you definitely need a warm up. You definitely need to move. And it kind of goes by person to person, especially at that level. Seth Keener warms up a little bit longer than AJ does, but they're both really competitive and really athletic. So it kind of depends on person to person, but it's definitely an important thing to mobilize your body, get your body prepared for movement, and not just jumping straight into a workout.
All right, last question for you. Parent comes up to you. They're confused. They don't know what to do. They feel overwhelmed. What is your encouragement to that mom or that dad as they go through this process?
My encouragement is that everything that you're doing is going to set them up for success in the future. So, as far as the gym goes, this isn't just a facility where we're training athleticism and that's it. It's going to set up good motor patterns that are going to carry them through their life, healthy habits as far as strength training goes, maybe nutrition, and it's going to teach them discipline, which they're going to need later in life. And as an adult, discipline is the biggest thing when it comes to nutrition, exercise, and a lot of different things in life. So everything that we're working on may seem like we're just working on athleticism, but really we're helping mold their kids and shape them into better people in the future.
It's the whole thing behind youth sports. Like, we're not just trying to win games. We're trying to shape capable and productive human beings for their entire adult life. You use the gym, I use the soccer field, like whatever the tool is there, or the sport, the activity is there to develop the tools for a long time life of health, so
Absolutely.
that they can be as not only productive, but as healthy as possible for as long as possible.
Yes.
Awesome. Brandon, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. If you like the show, please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, writing up a small review will be a giant help for us. If you listen on YouTube, make sure you go ahead and hit that like and that subscribe button. If today's episode helped you in any way, the best way you can help us grow the show is by sharing this episode with a friend. For now, though, I hope you have a great week watching your kids play, watching them compete, and all the things that come along with being a sports parent. We'll talk to you again next week.